Now you're welcome along. We are talking Rugby Champions Cup, Challenge Cup. As ever, our rugby coverage is with thanks to Energia. They sponsor rugby in Ireland at all levels. Grassroots with the Energia AIL. They are official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht, the Irish men's and women's teams. Their Rugby for All initiative welcomes everybody of all abilities to participate in the game. And if you want to learn more about Energia's exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. As for the weekend's rugby, mixed fortunes for the provinces. Leinster put 7 tries on Harlequins. It finished 45-28, albeit there were only 3 points in it after the hour mark. Munster at the wreck. Well, it was over after 18 minutes. They found themselves 28-0 down. A disastrous start. The final score was 40 points to 14. And then Challenge Cup, very contrasting fortunes. Ulster blitzed Racing in the second half to win 61-7. From 14-7 up at half-time. And Connacht, the opposite situation, second half capitulation. They were 21-5 up at half-time and contrived not to score in the second half and to lose 24 points to 21. Happy to say, Ian Madigan is with us, as is Rúaidhrí O'Connor in studio. Just one kind of theme which we touched on last week before we get into the specifics of the games. Kind of okay opening weekend. We sort of made it outside, myself and Will were having a look, that in maybe 5 of the 12 matches, you got the best against the best in terms of the respective teams. Like, there were plenty, if you watched all the matches over the weekend, of camera shots of star players watching on from the crowd. So, like, it's a kind of iffy start in that on the Friday night, both Bayonne and the Stormers are weakened in that game. And then you've, like, Toulouse scoring 56 points in the Sharks. Sharks, obviously, didn't send up their strongest team. Claremont away to Saracens, very much rested, and Saracens put 47 points on them to Claremont's 10. Sale at home, disappointing really at home against Glasgow. No George Ford, lost by 5 points. Like, that was there for them, you would think. Pow, they sent a rested side, etc. And of course Quins at the Aviva. Rare shining lights, Bulls against Bordeaux, which was 33-46. Great game. Toulon sent a strong team to Edinburgh and lost nonetheless. Scarlets Bristol, not sure how much squad depth they have, but they sent strong. They both played strong teams. So that's kind of the way of it, Rod. You kind of you check the lineups before you choose to watch some of these games.
Yeah. I thought the rugby on a whole was actually very good over the weekend, and I've come to terms, or I'm at peace with this at this stage, because it's not really the Champions Cup's fault that the unions keep putting in fourth internationals on top of outside of the international regulations. Thus, and then enforcing player rest periods on the clubs. Now, the RFU knew what they were doing when they played Australia. The same weekend Ireland played New Zealand in Chicago, and the Irish teams are going to suffer. We're going to be talking about this over Christmas. You know, Leinster won't have their full deck going to Munster, and Munster won't have their full deck. I can't remember. I think they're going to Ravenhill. So, it's just the way this competition has been squeezed by outside forces. The primacy of the top 14 and the Premiership was established once this competition was moved away from being the old Heineken Cup, which wasn't perfect either. The fact that there's only 4 weekends, the 6 teams in each pool with 4 going to the knockouts, you don't have to be at full strength. You can probably factor in that you're going to lose one of the games and still be right in the mix for the to top the pool. So yeah, it's not great value for people who are paying money to go to games, and that should be baked into the price maybe in some way. But I suppose, like, that's one of Leinster's marquee fixtures at the weekend, and they got a good crowd and got a decent game because Leinster, struggled to put Harlequins away. But unless we have a global calendar, as Leo Cullen alluded to in his interview, this is never going to change. It's never going to be fixed. It's not a Champions Cup problem; it's a rugby problem, because it's a dangerous game which players need rest. It needs to come sometime, and something's got to give. At the moment, everyone's kind of gobbling up with the available space, in particular the international game, because that's what pays the bills for everything else. And these additional internationals, we've 4 November tests next year, plus possibly a game in the States at some stage, and with the Nations Championship. We are losing a rest weekend during the Six Nations, but you presume the clubs are going to pay for that on the end of the Six Nations then as well. So we got to look after these players, because they're the ones. Without them, there's no game. And if this is when they're taking the rest. I watched Brentford Arsenal last week, and Keith Andrews left most of his stars on the bench. And everyone has to do it at some stage. It's a pity it's happening in Europe, but the way the format is, it almost just lends itself to it happening. So it's a flaw. It's a massive flaw. I'm not disputing that at all. But at this stage, we've discussed it so much. I don't know. I have a lot of new things to say about it.
Agreed. I'm glad you're at peace.
Thanks.
Philosophical tilt there to Rudd's contributions now. It's amazing. No, I sort of am as well. Like the battle has been lost. You know, it is what it is. Munster 14, Bath 40. So, I mean, when we're kind of bemoaning where the tournament has gone in some quarters, there was a full house at the Rec. Rudd, I know you were there. It had the atmosphere. It had the sense of anticipation. You know, as they walked out the tunnel, albeit Munster late on had lost two players. John Klein, personal reasons. Michael Milne injured in the warm-up. But nonetheless, there was like this great sense of, what's going to happen here? You know, can Munster put it up to them? And then, Ian, where do you want to start in that first 18 minutes when Munster found themselves 18-0 down?
Yeah, like you touched on it there. Three really big losses to the starting team in Klein, Milne, and Crowley. In particular with the conditions, you know, it was always going to be conducive to having a bit of ballast up front, and Klein in particular, you know, would have got you go forward ball, but also in the scrum, adding that extra weight in the second row as we saw how that game played out. Munster didn't help themselves, and it got away from them really quickly. It's a law that I'm not a massive fan of, is when you give away a penalty as a try is being scored. The try is scored, you've got your 7 points, and then the player ends up in the bin. You're now missing your best player in Tadhg Byrne, and you're also missing Klein, Milne, Crowley. And Munster just didn't manage past that 20 minutes of the game well at all. They had opportunities early on in the game to potentially take a lead. The line out was it just didn't fire for whatever reason. And that put Munster under significant pressure. But Bath played the conditions way better. You know, like some of the stats, like kick meters, for example, Bath had over 1,000, Munster were in around 600. You know, so big difference there. Finn Russell passed the ball 6 times. Now, 6 times in a whole game as an out half, and they were very good. Like it's a similar blueprint to what we're seeing England doing. They're just contesting in the air, and they're doing it really well. They targeted the Munster back three either early, or else they got them out of position, and they found found open space in the backfield, and when you have the likes of Arundel chasing kicks down, who's eating up the ground, you can go from playing outside your own 22, you know, in and around the opposition 22 from one effective kick and one good kick chase, and then they back it up with how they target at the breakdown. You know, they were just really effective on how they slowed up Munster's ball, got multiple turnovers, and it was a very comprehensive win in the end for Bath.
And was that Bath playing the conditions, or is that their usual MO?
That's their usual MO. They don't play a whole lot from deep. They look to play on transition. So when they win the ball in an aerial duel, then they'll play when they're coming up against a disjointed defence. But very controlled from the halfbacks throughout the game. They kick the ball really well, really organised in their kick chase, and then it means that the team is fresh when they're defending, and they just put Munster under so much pressure. Like when it's very difficult when you're away from home having to chase a game like that, and Munster were trying to, move the point of contact and trying to find space in the wide channels, but Bath were just getting off the line really well, impactful in the tackle, and then they pile people into the breakdown, and it was the Munster attack just didn't look fluid in any way.
So the conditions suited Bath's general game plan and wouldn't have suited a lot of what Munster are trying to do of late.
Yeah, like Munster of late, like I was really impressed with them in the first half against the Stormers, where they're moving the ball to the wide channels, bit of variation, whether it's short kicks, crossfield kicks, and then a real focus on keeping the ball alive, offloads out of the tackle, keeping the ball off the deck. And that's what you've got to do, because it's so easy to turn the ball over with how the breakdown laws have gone.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't get in. To play that game, you have to get initial go forward ball, and Munster weren't able to do that.
Just to box off the lineup, by the way, I mean, if people didn't see the game, it was torrential, as I'm sure Rudd can attest, for the first 15 minutes of the game at least, and that did not help matters. Munster lost 4 of their first 5. Tyke Byrne afterwards, pretty interesting and revealing, talked about how he kept calling 7-man lineouts and that was a mistake. I should have gone away from the 7-man formation earlier. We had lost 2 in a row and then I went back to it again. In hindsight, obviously, that was just a silly error on my part going to it again. He was sin-binned on 5 minutes. And like there was almost like this is not going to be your day to a comical extent with the third try when like a Munster player knocked it out of his own teammate's hand. It kind of coughed up into Ben Spencer and his kick. I mean, the ball just, you don't see it very often, just sat there 5 metres out. And like Simon Zemo said, you don't catch Arundel from that in those situations. Arundel just jogged up. There was no one near him. Like it's rare I say I could have scored a try, Rudd, as you know, but I could have scored that try. But even at that exact moment, you were like, nothing's happening here for Munster. Everything's going against them, and they are also architects of their own misfortune.
Yeah, I just think I'm getting a bit frustrated by the fact that Irish teams seem to be surprised that the way the game is going repeatedly. That Johnny Sexton's spoken a couple of times about how with our GAA background, Ireland should be quite good at the high ball game, and we're not seeing any signs of that at all at the moment. Munster's back three were cleaned out in the air. It was Bath retained.
It was Abrahams, Daly.
And Diarmuid Kilgallen, who was whipped at half time for a centre. And like I really rate Diarmuid Kilgallen. He's a big, powerful athlete, the kind of athlete that Irish rugby is crying out for. And he just got no change and was whipped at half time for Alex Nankerville. I don't know. There just seems to be. I think Irish rugby needs a refocus on a couple of key areas. Like this line out thing is happening across the board, and we keep hearing excuses about why it's not getting better, but we're not seeing the solutions being put into practice. And Byrne was very generous to his teammates. Yes, his calling was part of it. And like, I don't know what you're doing putting John Hodnett up at 2. He's probably the smallest forward you have. Maybe you're trying to show a bit of subterfuge against a coach who knows you really well and has probably analysed, he probably created some of Munster's line-out plays, but some of the calling was off, but so was the throwing. Diarmuid Barron had a poor game. A couple of players had the worst game of the season so far. Against a team you don't want to be playing. You need everything to go right for you away to Bath. I think they're contenders. They're a test match team. It felt like a test match performance, but Munster didn't feel like they were playing test match rugby. And yes, they were missing their Springbok lock and their test match out half. Plus Milne, who would have made a difference, and yes, they're missing. I don't think they would have ever planned to be going into Champions Cup games with John Ryan, a tight head prop, at the age of 37. But that's the situation they found themselves in. Yet the stuff that was in their control, they also didn't manage it well either. And it was quite chastening for Clayton McMillan. I think he's come over with knowledge of Munster, having analysed them, but I'd say he had he saw a lot of upside in this squad, but I'd say now, having seen what the level is, and we know Bath are not the best team in Europe, but they'll be one of them this year. If they get a Bordeaux, if they get a Toulouse, Toulon weren't as good as I was expecting them to be. Like they're still majorly in the pack, and they haven't come on as much as their first 5 games suggested. And it was their biggest defeat in Europe for 29 years, and that you can't get away from that, and you can't brush it under the carpet. It's a tough day at the office for them, and it puts them back in another points race. And then the game Mads was at yesterday, Edinburgh go and beat Toulon, that's a disaster for Munster, because they're that's because you expect Toulon to win their home games, and puts pressure on Toulon against them after Christmas, and suddenly it's a very, very difficult pool. So it's a bad weekend at the office for them, not insurmountable by any means, and they can get better. And Bath are a really good team. There's no shame in losing to them. Yeah, but I thought Bath looked like better prepared for the battle that was there than Munster were.
And maybe, I take Ian's point that their natural game is more appropriate for those conditions, and therefore it's a more straightforward kind of a night for them. But like the overriding sense, watching at home, maybe I presume it felt that way in the stadium, and Ian coming in this as well. And this is a basic point, but I just sort of I have it echoing post-November in particular. Munster, like too many of these Irish players, they just got steamrolled physically. Like it was just, if you didn't see the game, it was really wet. It was a shit show for the first kind of 15, 20 minutes. And one team just muscled the other team into submission. And you can dress up different things and tactics, but fundamentally, they looked on a different level physically to Munster.
It feels like 2019 and 2020 all over again. And Ireland thought their way out of that. And that's what, maybe it's a straw I'm clutching at, but Ireland have been, and Irish teams, this feels like a lull. I've been writing about this today, that Ireland is in that Irish rugby has had a bad 2025, and what happens next is very, very important. And the game is currently rewarding athletic prowess more than nearly anything else. And Ireland is looking like the athletic profile is really struggling. Like Dogbo was the one player who physically looked like he could mix it, and you put him in the same 23 as Jean Klein, and that gives you something. You bring Brian Gleeson back, that helps. You put Lee Barron in from the start, perhaps that helps. They're signing a South African hooker for next season from the Scarlets. That gives them some power in that front row. It beefs up their tight five. But absolutely, Connacht started really well, and they blew the Ospreys away for 21 minutes. But the abiding memory of that game for me will be them going through around 20 phases in terrible conditions. Their handling was brilliant, but they never punched. They had 14 in the front line from the Ospreys, a Welsh team down in their luck. Not a fearsome opponent, and Connacht couldn't punch through the middle of them. They kept trying to go around them. Didn't work at the moment, and Leinster are the one team who were able to do this, and also were very good against a very young Racing team on Friday. But Irish players are struggling physically against this profile of team. The South Africans, the English, the French, who've all got their house in order right now, and all the alignment that Ireland have is not getting them as far as it used to, and the game seems to have shifted away from them. You watch Joe McCarthy for Leinster, he's suddenly the most important player in Irish rugby because he gets them over the gain line. And there's a few others, but there's not many of them, and they need to get those players into the team. I spoke about it after November. Needs to be a priority on athletes, but the athletes need to be able to do the basics of lineouts, catch balls, all that sort of stuff as well. Yeah. It's slightly worrying, but it's fixable. It's you double down on the high game. You become the best team at that. You double down on the lineout. Why is Ireland not the best team in the world at lineout? That's a lot of that's technical. I know being 6'10" helps. Things like that there needs to be a refocus on all this stuff, because at the moment it's getting away from Irish teams.
Yeah. Ian?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Rhoda said. There's been a strategy change. What was working in 2023 is no longer working, and what was high on the phase count, looking to unpick the lock of the defence, moving the point of contact quite often with 3, 4, 5 passes, creating a mismatch in the wider channels, etching yourself forward, and then doing that across the pitch, working the short side effectively. You look at what the game is, where teams are being effective now. It's 5, 6, 7 phases. They're not seeing the picture that they want. They kick the ball away, or they go and they create an aerial contest. You've got Takir Abrahams coming up against Joe Cockanasinga in the air. Like Joe is 6'5", maybe 6'4" anyway. Abrahams is maybe 5'8", 5'9". So like you just have such a significant advantage there. As an oncoming player, it's nearly easier now because you've got more momentum as opposed to jumping up at the ball when you're stuck in the backfield. And that's where teams are conserving their energy in a different way than what we saw in the 2023 World Cup, in particular with the style that Leinster played, where it was nearly about aerobic fitness. It's not about that anymore. I actually don't think you need to be that fit to play the game. You just need to be really powerful and impactful. When you're in possession, you're bowling over guys. When you're clearing someone out, you're clearing them out miles past the breakdown. When you're tackling, it's an impact tackle, and you know that your team's coming in to counter ruck. And that's where Bath, you said it, Joe, looking at it, they just had that dominance in all those physical contests, because the players they're bought into that game plan. They're fresh, and they know that they've just got to give 100% in that particular moment. And in the back of your head, you know that you're not going to have to do that 10, 15, 20 times in that passage of play. You can empty the tank there and then.
And so on that point there, you think it's more mindset as opposed to they're just beefier, bigger athletes?
I think they've adapted to the most effective game plan quicker than what we have.
Yeah.
And I think like Joe McCarthy made a big difference for Leinster at the weekend, and we really missed him through that November series. He's one of our like genuine power athletes. Everything he does, high impact.
Where are you in that? Do you think it's a mindset thing and a tactical thing, or do you think actually we're just lacking the cattle?
Well, I think we've fewer cattle than the nations we're trying to keep pace with, and probably not as natural athletes as comes through those systems either, and not as diverse in athletic profile, because we get our players through a very narrow funnel of largely from private schools in South Dublin or in the greater Dublin area. So that has its limitations, and the RFU's inability to kind of extend the recruitment beyond that is, I think, a challenge. I mean, Ireland have folded the Sevens programme this year just as it was starting to produce wingers like Zach Ward and JJ Kenny. So that was a way of getting players from non-traditional backgrounds into the system, and they've folded it. So there are ways of getting around it. Ireland's, they were ahead of the game with footwork for a couple of years. Players were, footwork close to contact, changing that point of attack. Caelan Doris is brilliant at it. Dan Sheehan is brilliant at it. And if you get the best Irish players out there, there are still very, very good athletes who look a bit fatigued after the Lions, or still kind of coming to terms with the season. And the Lions is definitely a factor in why certainly Leinster and Ireland are behind the eight ball. I do think maybe there is some merit in going back to some of the stuff that Ireland did in and around 22 and 23 and have gone away from, attacking the short side, those short passes around the ruck, the way they were able to play through teams. They haven't played through teams in a long time. It's almost like they evolved beyond that. And now I wonder if they almost need to go back to some of that stuff, because it was one of the reasons they were able to turn the tide in this. And then with the aerial stuff, I mean, Ireland brought in Brian Fenton for one day last year during the Six Nations, and they're still talking about the impact that he made. There is no shortage of coaches who are able to coach high ball work in this country. And there's a lot of GAA coaches out there who you could bring in on a consultative basis, and make the most of the fact that this is a strength that is coached in this country, and work with the high ball stuff, because you can see with Ireland, and it's not filtering down to the provinces. They're actually in the backfield. They're standing 3 or 4 meters back, and they're running into when the ball is kicked to them. They're running and catching the ball up above their heads, and the provinces haven't gotten onto this for some reason. But you saw it with Hansen winning the ball over his head. Lowe goes over his head now, and Ireland weren't cleaned out in that area in the way that Munster were on Saturday. So that's an area I think that's you can adapt to that quite quickly, and you can get better at that without producing bigger, faster, better athletes. Sure, it would help if you had Israel Folau, but they can all get better at that. So a lot of this is coachable. Some of it is the limitations of the athletes that Ireland have, and the reliance on players like a Dogbo. Jack Boyle was really athletic and powerful on Saturday. Yeah. Porter can get back to that level. Furlong still wins collisions. There are players who can do it, not as many of them as you would like, but there's other things, there's other strategies you've got to make the best of what you have, and you've got to try and get the teams that you're playing to play your game rather than play the game they're playing. And part of that is just win your own line out. Don't knock the ball on. Don't give them scrums. Don't give them ins. Yeah. If you control the game, then they will start to look ordinary and make them do the things that they're not as good at. And Irish teams are not dictating the terms at this stage.
Ian, just one last quick one on this tangent. This is quite a difficult question to answer. Like the escort line law change has prompted this big shift or exacerbated it. Would you be fairly confident that 2 years out from a World Cup, that this style of rugby, this aerial game, this kind of physicality, that is going to be the in vogue style at the next World Cup, or is it very hard to predict?
No, I don't see it changing significantly. Okay. And it's not just this aerial contest; it's what happens off the back of that. 1 in 3 aerial contest results in a scrum. That again suits the power team. And when I'm saying what's working, as I've discussed already on the pod, I'm not necessarily saying that Ireland need to do that and copy it. Like, if you're a copycat, you'll always come second. But where I'd like to see Ireland getting back to, you think to the South African tour and the 2 tries that we got, bit of deception at the line, how the forwards and backs are integrating. You're forcing the defensive players to make decisions at the gain line. We didn't really see that, bar like a small bit in the Australia game. We didn't see it enough against South Africa and New Zealand. And that's where our point of difference has been in the past, where we, as Rudd touched on there, we need to be the smartest rugby team. We don't have naturally as big athletes. Like, you look at Miafu for Toulouse there at the weekend, 150 kilos. Even the likes of Van der Mesht, who Northampton have signed, another second row, 150 kilos. We're not going to produce these kind of athletes. But what we can do is control the controllables. Are we the best passing team that we can possibly be at the moment? Do we have the best footwork? Can we be the best airily? Can we be the best team at giving our players genuine opportunities to get up and compete in the air? Because we're not actually doing that. We're not doing the basics of the game well enough that we can control and we can do well.
Okay. Gloucester come into Porky Queef. As disappointing as Rec was, you'd make Munster very warm favourites to win well here.
Yeah, and I still expect them to get out of their pool, and the Toulon or not, their other away game is against Toulon, who they beat away 2 years ago, and is not the it's not Bath, it's not going to Toulouse, so there's still a future for them in this tournament. I don't see them as contenders to win it, but they've been through a pretty rough experience in the Rec, but that should stand to them as long as they bounce back from it and they learn the lessons and they improve all those areas. And the indications are that Crowley should be back, that ankle injury is a 1 weeker, and like JJ Hanrahan did some stuff really well. Some of his line kicking, his goal kicking, some of his option taking was good, but he was playing quite deep and quite behind the line. And Crowley's such an important player to Munster, so he can't. They don't have a squad to weather those kind of absences. They need Casey to improve. I think he hasn't come back as good after his injury.
I heard a few people saying they thought he was very good on Saturday. You didn't think so?
I don't think he's the player he was before he got injured.
Right.
Not to, he will get there again, but I just don't. I don't think he commands it the way he was. He looked really, really confident, and his decision making was really good. You think about the influence Ben Spencer had in the game; he was magnificent. I don't think tactically they were great, and I don't think the halfbacks. I just don't think that they were at it to the degree that they needed to be to win away at Bath. Munster had I think it was either 10 or 11 entries to the Bath 22. And they got 1.4 points per entry. They had loads of opportunities to get back in this game. And if they'd gotten within 7 points, which looked on the cards midway through the second half, they would have got 2 points out of it. Instead, it was a 5-0 defeat. And they've got to be better at in terms of their accuracy. I know the conditions were tough, but I praised Bath to the high heavens. I thought they were brilliant. I think Van Gran has put every lesson he learned in Munster into practice over there. And I think he's become a really, really, really high-end coach. And I think this is a team that can win it. But at the same time, it didn't have to be that bad for Munster. A lot of what they did was self-inflicted. And yeah, I think Casey can get a lot better. I have high expectations of him. I thought he could challenge Gibson Park this season, and I'm not seeing that at the moment.
Okay. The Aviva Stadium then, Leinster 45, Harlequins 28. So 7 tries for Leinster. Larmour scored twice and then got injured. It's a hell of a run he's on, unfortunately. Ringrose Frawley, Tommy O'Brien with probably the try of the night. Conan, Jimmy O'Brien, courtesy of a Rico Ioane pass. So it's so fun. It's like, I guess it is because after an hour it's 24-21. But Leo Cullen is like, listen, we scored 7 tries. Like, there's lots of good stuff when you're in the Champions Cup. Scoring 7 tries in a game is great. So already he's trying to say, we should feel good about this, but Ian, I don't think anyone felt especially great about it. In particular, you can see 28 at home.
Yeah, conceding 28 and the nature of some of those tries won't please them. But it's also can be challenging when a team like Harlequins comes with their second string side. You beat them by 60 points last year. Can you be as honoured as you should be? Human nature is going to affect that, and it did at the weekend. But it was a very dominant performance. You're looking at like 140 carries for Leinster to 55 carries. 32 defenders beaten to half that for Harlequins. 68% possession, 74% territory. Like, Harlequins barely saw the Leinster 22, bar the one time they ran clean through it in the second half for the try at the end of the game.
And the scrum.
Yeah, the scrum was a frustrating one, and like Paddy McCarthy was penalised multiple times. It's not my area of expertise, but my understanding was the ref was saying his feet were too far back and he was going down. But
they were dominating in the first half in particular.
The Harlequins scrum was under pressure, and then they made a couple of changes, and there was a bit of silly buggers going on. Yeah. And when Leinster were putting the ball into the scrum, they showed real dominance, but they were trying to target the Quinn scrum when Quins were putting the ball in, and Quins were very effective in how they managed the referee, Craig Evans, on the night, and they won penalties for either pushing early or stuff like that, where the referee's deeming that his feet are too far back. But you could also, I'm sure the Leinster players would argue that they weren't taking the hit.
Yeah.
So yeah, but sorry, back to my point. Like, it was a dominant Leinster performance, but some of the nature of the Quins tries, like there was one first phase where like Quins win the ball off the front of the line out. Like winning the ball off the front of the line out is not a good attacking platform because basically you've got to get around every player. And as a Leinster defence, I would have expected them to kind of really shorten up and compress the tail of the line out, but they were just too slow in doing it. And it was a clever play from Quins. I think, looking at it live, it was clear that they'd spotted a kind of chink in the defensive system, made it look like it was a simple carry then from the winger going into that kind of seam, transfers it to the centre, who then finds a soft shoulder, gives it back to the winger, and then he's just clean through and in under the sticks. And I think as well with Leinster, like they do like putting on a bit of a show, and they did pull away through the second half, but they didn't finish the game, as I would have expected, and just a scrappy piece of play towards the end of the match to then give, it wasn't a consolation try because it was a fourth try bonus point for Harlequins, which arguably keeps them in the competition. And look, that's the nature. We talked about it at the start of the show. Some teams just don't have the squad to compete, in all 4 rounds of the group matches. Quins are one of those teams, but they can still target their 2 home games and qualify versus, let's say, the likes of Bordeaux, who actually do have the squad to compete. And they're competing in a different way because they're looking at the seedings. They're going, we actually need to potentially get 4 bonus point wins to be the number 1 seed, or 19 out of 20 points, because we saw Toulouse come unstuck last year. They won all their games with bonus points bar 1, and that resulted in a 5th seeding, and that had a significant impact in their run to the attempted run to the final, having to play on the road. Whereas, and that's the top tier teams, the likes of Bath, Leinster, Toulouse, Bordeaux, and even the Stormers are right in it now. They can afford to play their top sides because that's where they're competing. Whereas Quins, Leicester, these teams are competing to get out of their group.
Yeah. Luke was talking about the breakdown quite a bit, Rory. He was saying they threw a lot of bodies into the breakdown. They decided to make it an absolute fight, and that was, part of a sticky period for Leinster. But in the main, he was talking about how they really haven't had everybody in the building very often. There was a degree on Monday of, geez, haven't seen you in a while. So in that context, it's fine. Like, they're just better than Quins. They should be beating Quins comfortably. They did in the end. There's a degree of like, this match will be so quickly forgotten by all of us. Not perfect, but plenty of mitigation.
Yeah, it's funny. It's not a game I was able to watch live because I was travelling to the Rec, and the message I was getting, I was like, God. And I then I watched it. I was like, this isn't that bad. It's fine. I mean, some of the soft defending will be a worry. Ireland internationals getting blown away by fairly unheralded anyway club players in what is a big game. That would be a concern. But the bits of mistakes and clunkiness and the lack of cohesion, that's understandable. These players haven't been together enough, and when they opened up, they look very good, and there's some moments of brilliant individual skill. That Sam Prendergast cross kick for Larmer's try, like the technique to be able to do that kind of side sweeper kick. The O'Brien moment, Owane had an impact. Harry Byrne looked very good coming off the bench. Jack Boyle was big. They still look like a team physically capable of competing at the very top, but whether they obviously can't be as leaky defensively and as soft in the contact when they go to Leicester on Friday, which suddenly looks like a really interesting game because they're not in their straps, and a game that we'd expect to win, but it'll be a tough afternoon against a team that finished second in England last year, who rested their players last weekend, but will have, I think, the whole lot of them out this week, coached by a line-out expert in Jeff Parling, who will be zoning in on that area of potential weakness, especially with a lot of second rows now missing, and Snyman's a doubt this week. So Larmer I thought was really good, and I was looking at him going, God, he looks powerful and winning collisions, and then he's suddenly going to miss out. Now they have the squad to cope with it, but I think we're going to be judging Leinster over kind of more medium term than we are just in one game. Their 2 away games are tricky. Bayonne is a hard place to go in round 4, and Leicester on a Friday night December is, when you're not playing particularly well, that's a really good test of where you're at as a team. So I think we'll expect to see them get better, but I think Leicester will give them a really good examination on Friday, and we'll we'll know a lot more about where they are come Friday night.
Yeah. I totally agree on Harry Byrne, by the way, when he came on. Just looks very assured. Even, kicking off the tee was beautiful. Everything was kind of really good. On Tommy O'Brien, so speed and like industrious and a clued in smart player. I didn't know he had that little bit of X factor in him, actually. It was great.
Yeah, and you can see the confidence of playing. He only got first cap in the summer, and he gets November. And November, it wasn't a brilliant November for him. It was a good November, but he probably would have liked to have bigger impacts and show that speed at times. But he's learning that test levels harder. But then you go back to Leinster, and suddenly you're not playing against South Africa, and you're playing against. You can enjoy yourself a little bit more and try things.
That's the word, enjoy, because Tommy O'Brien has struck me in a good way, of course, as like my fists are clenched and my teeth are gritted and I'm working and I'm clued in. Whereas this was like, if people didn't see it, he's in a one-on-one space behind. I'm sure people have seen the clip, the little side foot kick in behind and run around, and it was just so unexpected. It was like, a bit of self-expression,
and get a bit of energy to the team. Like a lot of the Irish players have looked beaten down. To go back to our previous conversation, whereas he looks like he's full of it. He's fine. He's 27, same age as Caelan Doris, and he's had so many injuries, and suddenly he's got his chance, and he's enjoying it, and he's given such energy to the rest of his team. And it's that expressiveness is contagious. I mean, his teammates must love playing with him because they can just get the ball in his hands, and things will happen. And there was an accuracy. One of my big bugbears at the moment and particularly was around Munster, was the kicking away penalty advantage with no real idea of what they're doing. Whereas that was such a targeted kick, so well executed. I'm not sure if it was on advantage or not, but it was just such a good decision, well executed, and he backed his skill set to get there. Similar with Prendergast with that cross kick, that was a real reminder of why this guy is getting picked in the games he's getting picked in, and that's a good thing as well, that he can build on. So O'Brien he's been one of the big success stories of a difficult year in Irish rugby, and if he keeps kicking on, that's a good thing for everybody.
In word on the 210s.
It was teed up nicely for Harry. Is one thing I'd say, and having been in that position, coming off the bench and seeing the opposition getting a little bit fatigued, your team potentially have underperformed a bit, and you're then thrown in, and full credit to him, he took that opportunity with both hands. I thought he definitely sped the attack up a bit, and also kind of broadened Leinster's horizons. Leinster's attack was quite blunt force for a large part of the game, and it's a big area that I think that they're going to have to grow in if they are going to win this competition, because you're able to go and beat Quins around the corner with like 3, 4, 5 just hard carries, quick ruck ball. Eventually you'll find a soft shoulder and you'll get through, and they did that, but there's not much deception, and it's really on kind of Gibson Park to pick the best option. But if you get bodies in front, you can stop them. And full credit to Quins, they were excellent in the tackle, and when they tackled you, they targeted the ball in the breakdown, and Evans came up with plenty of turnovers. Whereas Harry came on and just kind of got his hands on the ball a little bit more, and moved the ball away from where those Quins bodies were, kind of tighter to the breakdown, and just very assured. He's a lovely passing game. He's a good threat himself. He's physical enough to take it on. And that extra bit of width that Frawley provides I think is a nice option for Leinster at the moment. He's a big, strong guy, Frawley, and he's got that really silky passing game. And as a back three player, if you've got, a good passing 10 with a good passing 12, you're going to get a lot of reps on the ball. And Larmour was the main beneficiary of that. He kind of was playing that roaming role, and they were able to get his hands on the ball, and he's so elusive in those wide channels. He was making meters, getting offloads in, putting little chip kicks in behind. Prendergast, he was solid without being amazing. Some of his aerial kicks were good. When the game turned into a little bit of an arm wrestle, it was nearly like a hat tip of bit of respect to Harlequins. We're really in a game here, and it was those quality high kicks from Prendergast gave Leinster that kind of territory. Defensively, he still missed a couple of tackles, which has been an ongoing issue or work on. I'd imagine Leinster will probably stick with him for the Leicester game, but I do genuinely believe that the gap is closing.
Right. So that's interesting. You talked about the attack being blunt in many ways and a lack of deception. 'Cause, these are kind of tricky things to bring up when they've scored 7 tries. You can see how Leo Cullen was sort of saying, like, you want us to score 100 points, is what he was saying to some journalists afterwards. But when you say a lack of deception, could you expand on that? Because basically, rightly or wrongly, since Nienaber came in and the attack kind of fell through the floor in his first year, and they all sort of, tacitly admitted in public that had happened and they'd spent more time on their defence and maybe attack had suffered. I don't really feel, and I'm not blaming him, by the way, we've given enough focus on Jack Nienaber in the podcast in the last week, but since he's come in, the attack, Leinster have never looked as good in attack, in my opinion. Like, people running different angles, different things going on, they've just never looked as good. And I appreciate we're talking about how the game has changed in terms of tactics, so maybe that is part of it. Maybe they are going to the air more. But I don't see them really rip teams open all that often. I appreciate they put 62 points on Harlequins this time last year, and that was one of the better days. But in the main, going back 2-3 years when they were cutting teams open, they've never quite got back to that level for whatever reason. So when you say deception, is that at the heart of what you're talking about? Is it just Johnny Sexton's not there and that's just the big difference fundamentally? Or what is it, do you think, Ian?
I don't think it's just playoff 10. I actually think it's playoff 9 as well. What the big point I'm making is the way Leinster attacked against Harlequins by beating them around the corner, beating them physically. Will that lead them on to winning the Champions Cup? No. Whereas you look at, let's say, how Toulouse play and their focus is keeping the ball alive, keeping the ball off the ground, not having breakdowns, and that kind of French flair. Like, could that lead them to winning the Champions Cup? Yes, it could. The way Bordeaux play, how they move the ball to the wide channels, how Bath play, attacking teams on transition, being really patient and then getting the ball into your power athletes. For me, with Leinster, I think they need to have more deception when, for example, 9 is playing the forwards. It's just 3 guys running at what they think is best space. And a positive result is you get a soft shoulder and you edge the team slightly forward. But, even covering the Edinburgh Toulon game last night, like Ashman, the Edinburgh hooker, like, he just seems to have, license to run whatever lines he pleases. And he's such a good footballer. And like the lads were calling him Houdini afterwards because he just appears up out of nowhere. He hides in behind the back of other players. He hides in behind the breakdown. He uses the 9 to kind of cover himself. He'll appear late. And I just think that like footballing ability is there within the Leinster pack. The likes of Sheehan, Doris, even like Conan, they can do this, but I don't think they quite have the license. They're so set in running this like set structured shape. And if you're coming up against a really well-drilled team with an excellent defence and a good D coach that's going to tee them up during the week, they're going to get bodies in front and they're going to stop you, and then they're going to compete at the breakdown. What you need to have in your attack is you need to have a sense of unpredictability, that like we're not just doing the same thing over and over again. And I haven't seen that from Leinster for quite a while.
Yeah, but I thought there were, like, those forwards and the 3 pods and maybe a secondary line of defence behind them. Like a couple of years ago, we were talking about that as unpredictable. You don't know who's going to give it to you. Don't know if they're going to pull it back or run a hard line up the guts. And they can pick any option last minute. That's how that was being presented a while ago, and now it feels predictable.
Yeah, and look, maybe it comes back to how the breakdown laws have gone. That like you can run an amazing line, make a half break, get tackled, and the supporters, you're playing support, don't know that you were going to run that line, and if there's a split second and there's a defensive player there, he can just get on the ball and it's a turnover. Okay. And maybe teams have figured out that that's why they're not doing it, but I would like to see a bit more unpredictability and a bit more freedom to players to run a better, more effective shape, to force defenders to make decisions as opposed to just seeing what's in front and knowing that you've got to hit that.
But it's a difficult one for you to answer. But I guess you're in the stadium a lot, seeing these players a lot over the last couple of years. I can't also, in tandem with all that stuff that we talked about there, I just can't shake the feeling that this team feel tired. If you were to say to me, boil it down to one thing, I'd say 23 was everything for
Yeah.
this group, and now the Lions on top. I just think they're just flat. They're just tired. If you boil it down to that.
There's only so many Everests you can try and climb, and it's hard to care about every game in the way that you did about a 23 World Cup. But at the same time, we're 2.5 years on, or certainly 2 years on for 2023. There's another World Cup looming. They shouldn't be short of motivation from a Leinster point of view. They haven't won this tournament since 2018, and many of them have never won this tournament.
Yeah.
Like that, you look at that 2018 team; most of them are gone at this stage.
I think flat as in not demotivated. I think the battery's just empty for a lot of them.
They're professional rugby players. Like you can't just and many of them are still in their 20s. Like there's some of them are over. I understand where you're coming from because you do get that sense. I do think that the game plan, and I know you didn't want to talk about Jacques Nienaber, but he, as he said in his infamous interview, he runs the rugby program, and he's a defence-minded coach who's brought in to bring in his own defence structure. And I talked to a leading attack coach last year who thought that Leinster were massively fatigued on attack because they put so much into defence. So there is a literal fatigue in terms of like that line speed, that commitment to messing up every breakdown takes it out of you. Now they should be the fittest players. They're the best managed. Like I kind of reject that because like they are the best managed players in the world. Like they don't play as much rugby as players from other countries. Sure, the South Africans, some of them are based in Japan and don't play at a very elite level in terms of their club game, and they're really professional Springboks. But I don't think that should be an excuse. And if they are fatigued and they're flat and they're done, well, they need to be replaced because there are surely players out there who are vibrant and fresh and want to play for Ireland and want to play for Leinster and win trophies. Maybe they're not as talented, maybe they're not as good. Maybe we need to look at sabbaticals for leading players and give them 6 months like the New Zealanders do, or maybe like South Africa have managed to manufacture for Eben Etzebeth. Maybe there's creative ways you look at that within your system. Maybe you need to send them off to play Super Rugby for a few months. Like you need to be creative at what you do, but I can't see how I just can't see that being an excuse. I know that sense is there, but it can't be.
But who? Let me put it this way: that Tommy O'Brien, bit of spark, light on his feet, hungry. How many top Irish players do you look at and say, oh, they're like lambs just let out at spring at the moment? They have it.
There was a bit of that in the Lions. I thought some of them looked really vibrant in the Lions, and the Lions does generally tend to have a hangover. Like Wales took nearly 2 years to get over 2013. The 2013 Lions tour, so like we could be in for a bit of a long lull. But I agree with you, but it's up to other players to then come and take their places. Yeah. And if I know a lot of the Irish Lions are not playing well at the moment, and I think there is definitely a post Lions thing going on. But Andy Farrell will, and Leo Cullen, I'm sure as well, will say that these are the best players we have, and they will come back. And our system is supposed to be built to get the best out of them. So. They are well rested. They've all had. They haven't had great pre-seasons because of the fact that the Lions went late. But I think we can't really accept that as an excuse. You gotta Leinster fans will be absolutely outraged to think that these players are not motivated in the same way to play for Leinster, given what they haven't achieved.
Yeah, I didn't say not motivated. I'd say
flatness comes from motivation. You said that 23 was the peak.
I think it's the kind of thing where you put so much into it. There's just for every high,
emotionally,
there is a consequent low. Emotionally, physically, it's just the thing.
But they'll have to come out of that at some stage. Like I don't think Caelan Doris, Dan Sheehan, these players are done.
Nor do I. But I think the Lions is another big thing that you put a lot into. I know Doris didn't go on the Lions. It's flatness. It's a bit of that's fatigue, a bit of that's physical, a bit of that's mental. It's just that Tommy O'Brien point. Like the why of it is almost not important, whether it's World Cup hangover still, whether it's Lions, whether it's not playing enough rugby and not battle hardened, who knows? But I'm just saying, who has that Tommy O'Brien spring of the frontliners for Ireland where you're like, oh my God, this guy can't wait for the next breakdown? I think they're all, Ian, you can come in, but I think they're trying to, come on. I think they're forcing themselves to get there. And it's all connected to things we talked about. The lack of punch and carry that Andy Farrell's talking about, the lack of physicality we're talking about with Munster. We're saying they're predictable, but sometimes if you put a bit of life into a tactic, even a bad tactic with life into it is much better. That's sort of what I'm getting at.
No, and part of it is, look, these players that we're talking about have set a really high bar. You look at Porter, Sheehan, Kelleher, Furlong, Joe McCarthy, Doris, Conan, Van der Fleer. Are they playing right up to that high bar that they've previously set for themselves? No, and they'll say that themselves. But Do they want to be peaking in November, December? No, they don't. And yeah,
So
I'd
the
agree.
optimistic view is they could be almost pacing themselves on some level.
Not necessarily pacing themselves. These guys they're still working hard, right? But for example, the gym work that you'd be doing is more about, getting stronger. Um, at this current time, maybe putting on a bit of size. When you get to Six Nations time, the knockout stages of the Champions Cup, you're moving to more power exercises, moving quickly. You're not looking to get any bigger, and you're not chasing those big scores in the gym. You're looking to improve your explosiveness, light on your feet, but you can't do those gym sessions for 12 months because your baseline strength will fall off a cliff. Now that's just an example, right? But there's multiple examples I can give you both in attack, in defense, um, as regards what Leinster are doing at the moment. They're not looking to peak right now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they'll know that their season hasn't got going. I thought on Saturday it would be a more comprehensive performance. Look, it was still a good win. Will we see it this week against Leicester? Maybe we will. And, you said, look, Tommy looks sharp. Even like Joe McCarthy, why does he look sharp? Yeah, because he's had a few months off. His legs are feeling fresh.
Yeah.
And the schedule is challenging. But look, these Irish guys, Rudd mentioned it, they're well looked after. Compared to like a French player who's got to play, 26 regular season rounds. It's effectively 2 months longer than the URC season.
Yeah. Well, look, let's hope they can recover from the crisis of their 7-try, 45-point win at home to Harlequins. What's going wrong? Connacht 21-0 up. They have Blackline, the Georgian side, up to Tbilisi next. You alluded to it, Rudd, because they were dominating scrum as well first half. Like, the conditions were awful. 21-5 up, and then what would you say was the driving force of the capitulation?
They got the Osprey, an Osprey's prop got sin bin. They went down to 14 men, and a better prop came on, and
Right.
they had them like they went for the bonus point. It wasn't quite Bath, but they should have had the bonus point after about half an hour, and the Ospreys had this really big goal line stand. And Connacht just couldn't get it done, and then the Ospreys went down and scored, and suddenly they go into half time with a bit of life and a bit of hope, and they're proud players, and they came out and they figured it out at home because they were really poor in the first 25 minutes, but Connacht were really good. But Connacht only seemed to have 25 minutes of dominance in them. They weren't able to exert it across the game, and by the end, after the Ospreys had gone ahead, they did it like this. I mentioned it earlier. It was about 20 to 30 phases of like really good ball retention. Like at that stage of the game, there's nothing wrong with their fitness, nothing wrong with their ball handling, but they could not punch a hole. Paul Boyle did it at one stage. Bundy tried. They kept going out to back off Bundy when you're looking at him going, maybe you need to just carry and get them going forward. And eventually they turn it over, and they'll be really annoyed. They'll still be it might cost them a home quarterfinal, semi-final down the line, and it showed that probably Lancaster's got a lot of work to do to kind of have this team in contention to win this tournament, and top 8 URC is probably a more realistic target for them. But it was I was actually, they were on my flight going over to Bristol on Saturday, and they would have really been. They did target it. They picked a strong team. They made Aki captain. They had good players on the pitch, good players on their bench, and they'll be really annoyed that they got themselves in such a commanding position in difficult conditions on a heavy pitch, and threw it away. And gave life to a pool opponent as well, because the Ospreys suddenly will be feeling good about life.
Yeah. On Friday then, Ulster beat Racing 61-7. It was only 14-7 at half time. I mean, they were somewhat lucky to even go in 14-7 up. It wasn't Stephen Ferris, even on the commentary in Premier Sports, was very frustrated with like the physicality and the energy levels, and just was like, that's not good enough. And he was like, there's going to be a hairdryer at half time. That was kind of the mood as they went in 14-7 up at half time. So to win 61-7, they were either unbelievably good or we had a bit of a Racing capitulation.
Yeah, and look, similar to the Leinster getting motivated for Quinn's second string team, this was a second string Racing team. When that gets announced, you're going to kind of go, a bit of the anxiety is going to come out of you, but so quite often that can drive your performance. The fear factor wasn't there. But Ulster were off it in the first half, and Fez was spot on. And it was even interesting hearing Richie Murphy talk post game. He got the hairdryer out, and he made it clear to the guys: is this the team that we want to be? That we're making, decisions and errors like that, and falling off tackles, and playing with this kind of looseness, or do we want to be what we're working towards week in, week out? And full credit, got the reaction and really good performance. Like the attack for Ulster has been exceptional. Bonus point in every game, bonus point try in every game. And I covered a piece earlier in the season on how they're finding that best space. And that's not moving the ball from width to width. The best space can be directly in front of you. It can be going to the kick space. It can be going to the middle of the field and working the short side effectively. And you can see day by day, week by week, it's beginning to come together. Mark Sexton's been a great addition to the Ulster coaching staff. He's running the attack, and he'd be familiar with some of the players that he would have coached at underage. And the players really are enjoying working under him. He gives them a clear framework. He gives them ownership of the execution, and just clear messaging both in meetings and on the training pitch, and it's beginning to kind of come together for them.
Okay, that's positive.
They've signed really well in terms of Augustus and Angus Bell, and there was just one brief period in the second half where they had Bell punched, Augustus punched. Bell was in the next carry, Augustus. And that's the template for them, because we're talking about power forwards. They are power forwards, and if they can get those two working in tandem, and then get that Mark Sexton attack running off the back of that, they can have a very good season. They're one of the better stories in Irish rugby right now.
Okay, the ship's turning.
Yeah. Jude Postlethwaite's been
look,
he had his breakthrough season last year, but was some tough days there when Ulster weren't playing particularly well, and you're kind of being shoveled out ball, and you're hoping he's going to pull a rabbit out of the hat. Whereas now he's getting the ball with genuine one-on-ones in front of him. We've touched on it, and we see Stu McCluskey doing it. Like, offloading is a really in vogue part of the game at the moment. If you can be a big body, we see it with RG Snyman week in, week out. You just don't allow defenses to get set. You don't give them an opportunity to poach the ball on the ground. And he has an excellent offloading game, and that's because he's powerful. He's got good footwork, and his ability to hold the ball in one hand. He's really brave, and you've got to be brave to be a good offloader, because you've got to open up your rib cage and run the risk of getting whacked. And he's someone who, could we see him, Rud, maybe look at getting in for the Six Nations?
You mentioned that a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think he's probably putting his hand up. We've spoken about centre depth, at length, and he's probably the one who's in the chasing pack leading the charge.
Well, if we're saying we need an injection of freshness and enthusiasm and all that kind of stuff, then, I guess it's now or never with the view to the World Cup. Fellas, that's us. Ian, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Joe. Thanks, Rud.
Cheers, Rud. Enjoy Porky Queeve.
Thank you.
And phone me when you get home, will you? And hope that goes.
Tell you all about it.
Yeah. All right.